Hi, everyone. I hope everybody's doing great today, despite, the cold weather that we're having. My name is Susan Jama. I am the Programs and the Community Coordinator here at Onsite. We would like to welcome you to Onsite Gallery. So today, we have the More Than Human artists who are part of this panel. Jane will definitely introduce all of them today, and Jane is the curator of this exhibition. So without further ado, I would like to offer the land acknowledgement. Onsite Gallery acknowledges the ancestral territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishbek, and the Huron-Wendat, who are the original owners and custodians of the land on which we work, stand, and create. A little bit about Onsite Gallery. Onsite Gallery is the flagship professional gallery of OCAD University and an experimental curatorial platform for art, design, and new media. I would also like to offer our acknowledgement to the supporters of this exhibition. We are grateful to many organizations that supported More Than Human, including Canada Council for the Arts, Ontario Arts Council, Toronto Arts Council, Social Sciences and the Humanities Research Council of Canada, York University's Department of Computationalization Arts, I hope I said that right, Computational Arts, State Cultural Capital Foundation of Latvia, Digital Media at York University, Sensorium Lab, Nexus, and Slow Lab. And I would also like to introduce you to the curator, Jane Tingley. A little bit about Jane. So Jane is an artist, curator, director of Slow Lab, Symbiotic Living, Ecologies Lab, and associate professor at York University. Her studio work combines traditional studio practice with new media tools and spans responsive and interactive installation, performative robotics, and telematically connected distributed sculptures and installations. As a curator, her interests lie at the intersection of art, science, and technology with a special interest in collaborative creativity for innovation and discovery. So I'm gonna pass it on to Jane. Here you go.
I'll just stay seated here. So thank you very much for coming here for this panel discussion. I'm really happy to see everyone here, and thank you to all the artists for being here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna have the different artists speak. We're gonna start with Lindsey. So Lindsey French is a settler artist, educator, and writer whose work engages in multi-sensory signaling within ecological and technological systems. She is exhibited widely in exhibitions, including at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, the International Museum of Surgical Science in Chicago, Pratt Manhattan Gallery, New York, and 6-8 Art Institute in Copenhagen. They earned an interdisciplinary BA in Environment, Interaction, and Design at Hampshire College, and an MFA at the Art and Technology Studies at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She currently resides in the prairie landscape of Treaty 4 territory in Regina, Saskatchewan. They are an assistant professor in creative technologies in the Faculty of Media Art and the Performance at the University of Regina.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Great. Thank you so much first for the invitation to be here today. Special thanks to Jane and Lisa and Susan and Ryan, and a special thanks to Syed and Omar, and also to Rebecca. I'm going to talk today about phytovision, which is an ongoing body of work in which I facilitate phytocentric or plant-centric experiences, reworking human-centered cultural objects such as cinema or television or other forms of light-based media for plant perception. And this series of work began with video tailored for plant perception, but the work has expanded to include multisensory elements in its installation. In this particular installation, I work with video, the sonic or tactile, scent, and light more largely. And in this work, my goal is not to claim a knowledge of plant experience, but to reposition the human and plant relationship. Is there something to learn in taking a more passive position? Can practices rearranging traditional hierarchies allow for a new way to value the marginal, or develop a comfort with ambiguity, or to be with the pain of realizing oneself as the aggressor? Can practices of receptivity momentarily disorient us from the anxieties and failures of anthropocentrism and settler colonialism, and orient us towards more reparative work? And we can just sort of slowly skip through the slides. So the work here today, yeah, we can stay right there, it's great. The work here today is oriented around Cook Forest. So it was all recorded around Cook Forest, which is an old growth hemlock and white pine forest broadly in western Pennsylvania. And I spent a lot of time here when I moved to Pittsburgh in 2018. As I spent more time there, I learned more about this place, which for time immemorial was Seneca land, ceded in a disputed treaty in 1784. And some of the trees in this area are estimated to be over 600 years old, beginning their growth in a time before settlers occupied the land. And a couple slides forward, there's just a couple of images of maps to like help locate this region, if the slides can go forward a little bit. So the pink dot is actually in the wrong location. I'll just point to it. So it's sort of just under that 1784 is the location of this forest. And there's one more map that shows Pennsylvania broadly, and the dot is in the right place there. So the Seneca were part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, which is a group of 5 nations that were united under an agreement of peace. And we can fast forward again. And I learned about this great law of peace, the way that it's embodied in the white pine, whose needles grow in clusters of 5, in a similar way of the 5 nations growing together. So this was like a way for me also to learn and understand and identify this plant. So an image that we see here is projected onto a typical screen, is made of 3 primary colors, red, green, and blue, and it's designed, this kind of media is designed specifically for eyes with these 3 cones. Plants themselves perceive lightness and shadow, and most plants perceive the colors red and blue in the spectrum of red and blue. So if I were to walk by in a red shirt or a blue dress, a plant could register that color against a bright light. Many plants, as we know, also have mechanisms to perceive gravity and electric fields and water content of soil and air and touch and sound and hosts of chemical interactions, airborne or passing through the soil. So the video work here in this exhibition, that's okay. It doesn't look like these impressionist paintings. But for those in the room, you can see them over there. But maybe the zoom, oh, there we go. And they're mostly here just for ambient viewing, so it's okay if they're not timed. So the video work here includes video portraits of white pine and hemlock, as well as the ferns and forest flowers of this place. They were recorded at a high frame rate to create a sort of slow motion experience. So usually we're used to seeing time-lapse images of plants, which sort of speed them up to make them look more human or animal. But this is sort of reversing that gesture to slow us down, bring us into what I consider like plant time. I also filter the videos into this area of the visual light spectrum that we share with plants. So not only light and shadow, but also this region of the red and the blues. So phytovision, as both a practice of perception and a plant-oriented media, began as this experiment to destabilize the primacy of human vision and to quietly and slowly open up a number of modes of perception beyond these clear distinctions of our human senses. So I also, as I was spending time there, I also started to work with sound. So here you can see one of my recording devices, a geophone, sitting atop a fallen log. While I was spending time in Cook Forest, I made geophone recordings of the forest floor. So geophones are devices that geologists use to measure vibrations of the earth. And then these can be amplified into the realm of human hearing. This is an image of Cook Forest while I was out there. It's like very humid and beautiful and filled with, amazing VOCs, which we'll talk about later. So some of the geophone recordings were made while it was raining, and the geophone recordings are played back as vibration in the seating platform in this installation. And it's also played back on this leaning wall, so you don't have to necessarily sit down on the floor, but can lean against the wall. And yesterday I was chatting with Colleen, who pointed out that the reeds also pick up some of the vibration, so you can actually feel it through the reeds, which was unexpected to me. But yeah, it gives you a chance to sort of feel the forest floor through these tactile sensations. So one other element of the experience of this forest was working with VOCs, which I mentioned, or smell. So VOCs are the airborne, or there's sort of a lot of types of VOCs, but the ones I'm interested in are the airborne compounds that plants use for signaling. And in this exhibition, I worked with terpenes, which are sort of described as like having that sort of turpentine smell or piney. They're kind of terpy is a way of describing them. But these were developed by early land insects, actually, and then later used by land plants to confuse insects. So they're one of the more common chemical defenses in the world. And that's also why, like, if you're walking around a forest like Cook Forest, there are not a lot of mosquitoes around. There's not a lot of insects because it's so full with terpenes. So for this installation, there were a couple slides back, but you can also see over here, I installed these sort of like long reed diffusers. So up in the box is a custom fragrance that works with essential oils of white pine and hemlock that were harvested here in Canada. And then they were amplified using some of the terpenoids like that are also found in these plants. So I also added alpha terpineol, which is that sort of turpentine or piney smell, isobornyl acetate, which is like a woody pine smell, and then humulene, which is also a woody smell that's found in like hops and marijuana. So as I was sort of thinking about the atmospheric, I sort of returned back to light and light-based media. And so you'll notice that the whole installation is sort of bathed in this these red and blue grow lights. The grow lights were actually used to grow plants in the original installation of this work, but they create this sort of magenta experience. And it sort of avoids documentation. Sometimes it shows up as pink, sometimes purple, but it also has this effect on your sensorial experience of bathing you in this light and changing what it feels like as you leave the space, and everything turns a little more yellow or green. So it affects this experience. So I'm interested in sort of being situated sensually in different roles among plants, landscapes, and other materials to destabilize human perception. And also to just position us in this place where we realize that the communications around us are not even necessarily for us. I'm reminded of Dylan Robinson, who talks about when a sound is maybe not for you. And there's something powerful in dealing with that incommensurability. How can you be there without trying to assimilate it? And just sort of like sit and be there with that difference, that incommensurability, and maybe even to find pleasure in it. And I'll end with a quote from Michael Marder, who says, "Resistance to instrumentalization is a sure sign of love." And I'm interested in these kinds of relationships to develop with plants that are not about instrumentalizing, but offer other forms of relation situated in love. So I'll end there on love. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lindsey. The next person who's going to speak is the lovely Grace Grothaus. She's a computational media artist whose research explores ecosystemic human and plant relationships in relation to the present global climate crisis and speculative futures. She's interested in art's potential to foster empathy with more than human worlds. She's frequently collaborative. Grace works with scientists, engineers, musicians, and other visual and performing artists. Her works have been exhibited widely, including at ISEA, the International Symposium of Electronic Art, in a number of locations, including Barcelona, the Environmental Crisis, Art and Science in London, UK, Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris, and the World Creativity Biennial in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Currently, Grace is pursuing a PhD in digital media at York University, where she has been named a Vista Scholar and a Graduate Fellow of Academic Distinction.
Thank you, Jane. It's a pleasure to be here with you all, so thank you very much. The artwork that I have in this exhibition is Dawning, and it's the very first time that it's been exhibited. It was made here in 2023, just finished up a couple weeks ago. It's a single channel video on a custom projection screen that you'll see here on the left of the slide and in the center of the gallery. And the work is responding to the idea of the dawn chorus. Across the globe, living things respond to each new day in a beautiful and endless wave as the sun sweeps over the earth. And I consider dawning an audio-visual celebratory meditation on this daily circadian rhythm of organisms as they respond to their environment, and an invitation to gallery visitors to join in if they so choose. Next slide. Thank you so much. I'd like to spend just a minute of the brief talk on situating this artwork within the broader context of my practice. My research creation practice centers around the present global climate crisis and speculative futures. I'm particularly interested in the balance of ecosystemic relationships, or the lack of balance, and how human technological and cultural production intersects with that, and how we can use it as a means by which to imagine potentially alternate and better futures for ourselves. These questions have led me to a range of theoretical and material investigations. They're expressed in a variety of media, but commonly through physical computing installations, which take place both outdoors and in galleries. Sometimes I bring the outdoors into the gallery with living material, and sometimes I bring the outdoors into the gallery through live data, such as in this piece, Dawning. Next slide. In summary, my interest is in environmental data visualization for the purpose of revitalizing our connections to our environments, engaging participants in thinking of holistic ecologies, and interrogating questions about the supposed separation of planetary built and natural systems as imagined by the current Occidental worldview. Next slide. As part of my research creation practice, I read quite a lot. Here are a few of the writers that are formative in the thinking that I currently inhabit and express through the works that I make. Frequent writers that I visit are Donna Haraway, Suzanne Simard, Peter Wohlleben, Merlin Sheldrake, Timothy Morton, and Robin Wall Kimmerer. Next slide. Of particular note lately is Breathe, Investigations into Our Atmospherically Entangled Future. And this is an interdisciplinary compilation of essays by Klaus Lowenhart, focused around climate and specifically atmospherics, all as an invisible connecting medium that reaches into, through, and between all of us and all species. As plants breathe out, we breathe in, and we breathe out, they breathe in. Next slide. I also look at and inspired by so many artists, many of which are actually in this exhibition. But to name just a few more, Tarique Hapoja, Beatriz da Costa, Camila Marimbio, C+ Arquitectos, Studio Fantasma Michael Pinsky, Natalie Jeremenjenko, Pinar Yoldes, Spele Petrick, and Jane Tingley. Next slide. Dawning has evolved out of key past works of mine that continue to inform and expand within my current practice. And these include projects that you see here on this slide, including Rise, which in the upper left-hand corner. And this is a performance that investigates the role that climate change is taking place within our oceans as they project into the future. And the first piece in which I was using scientific data, in this case, hydrophone recordings from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. Also, Sun Eaters, which is on the left in the bottom center. And this is a series of artworks in which I use sensors to measure the bioelectric activity present in all plants and translate that to light so you can literally see them grow. And then on the left is, on the bottom left is Against Our Better Nature, where I take my forest bathing and field research and do photogrammetry of the seeds of the species that are in these places that are hotspots for vanishing biodiversity, and then record these and exhibit them in a number of different ways. Next slide. Dawning, as you see here in this exhibition, is a commissioned artwork by Jane Tingley and part of her Foresta Inclusive Umbrella project. So the infrastructure underpinning the project Dawning is from her network of sculptural sensorial hubs. And so these are situated in the forest, in this instance currently the Rare Charitable Reserve Forest. And unobtrusively on a tree, they're gathering different types of environmental data. And the hubs are Wi-Fi enabled, so through the Internet of Things, or IoT, they're able to send it out to a web platform, and then those eco-sensors data can be harvested. Next slide. So the live data from the body of the forest is aggregated at shifter.io, which you'll see here. And this includes CO2 levels, humidity, light levels, temperature, VOCs, which is volatile organic compounds, wind speed, airborne particulate matter, and soil temperature. Next slide. For Dawning, I'm subscribing to the live data feeds through MQTT protocol, and specifically looking at those that are airborne, atmospheric. Here are some images from the experimental iterative prototyping phases of creating Dawning. Next slide, please. These data feeds alter the pre-recorded video playback. The original video you can see on the left here in the Software Touch Designer, and the altered video on the left with the different data streams in the different objects that are rendering both the temperature, wind speed, CO2, and light levels as video aspects. So the brightness level, the black level, gamma, and red channel in the video are all live affected by the conditions at the Rare Charitable Reserve. Next slide. Dawning is an audiovisual celebratory meditation, I hope, on the circadian rhythm. And I see it as a way to bring the forest into the city. So we're here in the downtown of Toronto. We have electric lights, we have schedules. All these things take us away from the natural daily rhythm that we might experience were we out in the forest. So through this piece, this 19-minute video, I hope that you have a moment to kind of step outside of the pace of the city and back into the rhythm of the forest. Next slide. The filming of Dawning took place over a period of weeks in this past summer, and each day I would wake up before dawn, begin to record with my camera and field recorder. And this and the next couple slides are still images from that. This is a ring-tailed lemur. Next slide. I took hours of raw footage and cut down to about 19 minutes. Next slide. And the more dreamlike sequences are those which I ended up culling for the final piece. I had this sense of trying to convey the joy and the playfulness of actually being there at the break of day and listening to the different animals. And the particular color when you close your eyes and you look at the sun and you see the red of your eyelids. So I'm changing the R channels in the video so that with the wind speed in the forest so you can kind of get a sense of that. Next slide. The end result is abstraction, more atmospherics, less concrete forms. Next slide. And hopefully sort of an atmospheric sense of being there on site. Next slide. And a big part of the final piece are the reflections that you'll see through the screen and onto the gallery walls. These are punctuated by cutouts in the pattern of tree canopies that create the dappling of the light that you might see on the forest floor. Visitors are invited to recline on the screen. You can immerse yourself in the projection. And there's a microphone. If you choose to join in the daily chorus, you're invited to do that yourself. Next slide. Really briefly, I'll just show you the process by which those images became the screen. I took images of the tree canopy. Next slide. And then in Fusion 360, copied these to create the pattern of negative shapes that would be then cut out from the screen. Next slide. And then this rear projection film was then able to, next slide, show you those images. And another aspect of the production of this was recreating the gallery in a 3D model so that I could walk through it in my mind and iterate the different ways that this could potentially exist until it finally struck on the final form. Next slide. So with the final work, I hope that dawning provides a means of reconnecting to, seeing yourselves within, and enjoying a microcosm of our deeply interconnected collective biosphere that we call home, Earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Grace. And the last two artists to speak today are Rasa Smite and Raitis Smits. They are Riga and Karlsruhe-based artists and co-founders of RIXI, Center of New Media Culture in Riga. They are co-curators of RIXI Art and Science Festival, chief editors of Acoustic Space, as well as co-chairs of recently founded NAIA, the Naturally Artificial Intelligent Art Association in Karlsruhe. Together, they create visionary and networked artworks from pioneering internet radio experiments in the 90s to artistic investigations in electromagnetic spectrum and collaborations with radio astronomers and more recent techno-ecological explorations. Their projects have been shown widely at exhibitions and festivals worldwide, including the Venice Architecture Biennial, Latvian National Museum of Arts, House of Electronic Arts in Basel, Arts Electronic Festival in Linz, etc. More recently, they both have been lecturers in MIT ACT, the Art, Culture, Technology program from 2018 to 21 in Boston. Rasa Smite holds a PhD in Sociology of Media Culture and her thesis, Creative Networks. Raitis Smits holds his doctoral degree in arts, and he is a professor at the Art Academy of Latvia. 2017, Raitis was a Fulbright researcher in the Graduate Center of NYC.
This is on? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jane, for introduction. And I want also to thank Jane, Lisa, Ryan, Susan, and also all the team of OCAD and Gallery also who made this exhibition happen. So thank you very much. And okay, so we are also very happy to show our atmospheric forest, virtual reality immersive artwork here, especially in this exhibition where more than human and where I have a feeling like all works kind of complement each other. Yeah, so they are really like reading all these interesting stories by all individual artists. So I think we can get somehow like a whole picture together. And okay, next. So atmospheric forest. So it's based on a 3-year research in Swiss Alps. Next. So. Which is, and also this artwork, this is visualizing the complex relations between the forest, climate change, and the atmosphere. Next. Yeah, so there were many research questions, but because it was pretty clear, the intent was that we would like to create an immersive experience of the forest, but we also wanted to show the invisible processes, and we were searching through this research about what is this missing link which would connect this forest ecosystem with the surrounding environment through the air and the atmosphere. Next. So for me, when I started to work together with scientists in Switzerland, I was kind of a bit surprised. I somehow didn't expect that trees, of course, they do breathe as well. I mean, it's nice also like a symbolic saying that they emit, but in fact they also breathe sometime. Maybe it's in the night, but they also are suddenly transforming all this process upside down, and they are also receiving some oxygen and releasing sometimes quite a lot, even up to 20% CO2, and this process is just so complex. So that this was on the core of our research to try to show this complexity. Next. And finding the focus of this work. So we were choosing also this, I already mentioned, these volatile organic compounds, or the smell of the forest, so which is emitted by the trees, especially the pine trees. Not all trees emit so strongly, but pine trees definitely does. Okay, next. Yes, and also just imagining and thinking about also this CO2 process, and when the trees die, they also are actually releasing all CO2 back into the soil, atmosphere. So it's this complexity was really fascinating. Okay, next. Yeah, next. Next. This was a specific Swiss ancient alpine forest. Because it's in a valley. It's very, very dry there, and there for about 20 or 30 almost years, Swiss scientists from the Research Institute of Climate and Forest Research, they are performing different type of experiments, kind of a living area, so they have a large sets of data, trying to understand and modulate also model how this climate changes, especially through the drought, are creating the stress to the forest and how this forest reacts. Yeah, next. Yeah, so they're putting all these little tiny labels to every small species, which are just and small trees, and then they are also measuring the how these trees are shrinking because of drought. Next. Then they also are collecting everything which is just falling down of this forest ecosystems. Next. And they are also artificially irrigating some areas, trying to compare, so to have a better understanding the conditions of the forest. So how it would be if there would be enough, like I don't know, humidity, and how it's actually in a control areas is drying out because of the heat, which every year becomes much more. Dry and quite dramatic. Already 50% are dead. Okay, next. Yeah, and so for me, the most exciting was that one day in field trip in this empty forest, there is very, very even little activity because it's pretty hot, pretty dry. So once I met a visiting scientist from Finland, so who was putting all these mass spectrometers around the barks of the trees, because they had an idea, but because if the trees emit, probably the whole trunk emits. So this was probably what usually scientists don't do. They more work with the leaves, but then they realize that actually even if you calculate the CO2 in a forest, so there could be probably different formulas needed, because all trunk, the bark of the tree, so they are fully also emitting a lot of these volatile emissions. Next. And next. Okay, so next. So there were next, please, to picture. Yeah. So I borrowed this scientific LiDAR scanner. So I brought it to Swiss Alps, and I scanned these 5 or 6 areas. So I was choosing some of those dry and some of those which are artificially irrigated. Next. So that's LiDAR scanner. Next. Yeah. So, and what was fascinating, because with the laser, the first round it goes 360, it takes the structure of the forest, and then it takes another 360 movement, and then it makes RGB images. But the structure was the most fascinating because actually so you can also, this is already the data, you can analyze the density of the tree, barks, and also other objects to recognize just by these data. Okay, next. Okay, next. Yeah, next. So these are. So we luckily got this scientific data, and Raitis will explain. Just go next.
Yeah. I will maybe. Can you come back a little bit? Yeah. Maybe I'll just tell very briefly the structure of the work. So for those who've seen, so it's a virtual reality experience, and in the beginning we were not really puzzled, but we kind of were trying different ideas. What to do, how to represent it, what kind of visual language should we choose, what artistic language should we choose to talk about these processes. But then the tools themselves, in a way, suggested us the direction where we should go. And when Rasa brought back these 3D scans of the forest, so which is generally a point cloud, so when we reduced the amount of points 10 times maybe, or even more, so we immediately kind of suggested us that the small particle systems which would represent and visualize these data would be the right way to go. So also we chose that data sets actually should be the basis, the content of the work. So it's our interpretation about the processes visually, but the data sets are real, and that's the actual content which is happening and showing so what's happening in this ecosystem. So next. Next slide, please. And then the next one. Yeah, this is, we started with those 6 data sets where the first one, first 2 ones actually are the most important, which is resin pressure and volatile emissions emitted by tree trunks. So, and those are represented as these particle systems in the trees, so which you can experience in a virtual reality environment. And then there are 4 more data sets. Altogether, it's a 17-minute experience, which is sped up, and we have 17-minute experience, but it is half a year data from one growing season. And there are 4 more data sets besides volatile emissions and resin pressure. It's a day-night cycle, humidity of the air, moisture of the soil, and also the temperature of the air. And those are in different visual languages are represented all in one experience. But here you see the slide, and next please. So besides that, we also decided that actually it's important for us also to touch the actual material and to play with it. And Rasa did this resin melting experiment and performance where she obtained coniferum from melted resin, and further, so when you distillate, so you can actually get the turpentine, and the smell of the turpentine, that's the actual very concentrated smell of the forest, what you can feel in the summertime in a pine tree forest. Next, please. So yeah, these are the slides from kind of self-made distillation process. Next. Next. And that's the coniferum sculpture, so which we got. Then next, please. Yeah, I don't know if Russ, so we probably, how are we at time? I think we just have to, next please, yeah. So you want to finish?
Yes, just to summarize, so basically what we did, and also we also kept discussing with the scientists, so how they see art and collaboration with the artists, if there is any potential for the science as well. And then they said yes, because when they are usually have to be very precise, and also they have to work in a quite precise also framework. But when artists start asking them different questions, then they start to see the same issue or problem from different sides. So this is one thing. And the other one, when I was showing this final visualization of the art, so they were saying that this is exactly how they would like to show the processes, scientists, if they would be artists, because they said, first of all, this is the structure, the forest. So yeah, very beautifully scanned. So it can really maybe emotionally also kind of engage with people, so that they see this forest from different perspectives. And the second, they said, that's great that there are these processes we are showing. So like one growing season of the different type of emissions, of humidity, of soil, humidity data. So, and this all is on the top of the structure. So for them, they said they would love to work instead of charts also with these three-dimensional kind of immersive spaces.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that.
Thank you.
We'll finish here.
Thank you so much. I also wanted to mention, I wanted to give Suzanne Morissette's regrets. She is not feeling well today, so she couldn't come today. So we're going to do without. But she created the lovely piece in the back called One and the Same. So I do encourage you to please experience the artwork. So the way I was hoping to run this, if you guys are up for it, I'm really hoping that the audience can get a chance to ask questions as well. I have a few that I'd like to ask. So I thought I might ask a couple, and then anybody who wants to ask a question, we can hand a microphone off to you. So the first question I have is, in the show, in many ways, the works in the show decenter the human. Focus on relational and foreground stories that are unfolding around us and aren't necessarily about us. And I'm hoping that each of you can please talk a little bit about your artworks in relation to this decentering of the human and how this helps you tell your individual stories. And any of you, please.
Yeah, shall I? Yeah. For us, we told already in an interview, so for us coming from Latvia, actually, it's quite different maybe that we've been living, because Latvians are, we are quite old culture, and we've been living, like in a way, the nature has been always part of our culture. So in that sense, we do not really differentiate much, so which is the human culture and which is the nature, kind of just the resources, I would say, or something out there. So we've been living with this sort of notion that that is part of our lives, and that's why always also in our artistic practice, mine and Rasa's, we've been working with, we are using technology, but the subject in our artworks most of the time, especially recently, is about nature, is about different processes in a nature. And what we sort of try to kind of bring out or show is that those processes are constantly ongoing, and those processes are sort of part of life on the earth, which we are part of also. And I don't know, like, yeah, how successfully we do it, but yeah, this natural culture paradigm is for us is that it's one kind of environment.
I can add to that the view that I'm espousing through the work Dawning is one that there is no separation as well. That the idea that we are part of this more than human, this multi-species ecosystem of all the chorus. And a chorus you can't have with a single voice. It's all the species speaking together and all the ways that they do that. So yeah, for me, that's a really central part of the work, is just trying to get away from the idea that there is an Occidental apex and more to a lateral understanding of a holistic ecology.
Yeah, I mean, I think this idea is also really central to like the motivation for making the work in the first place. And I think the role of decentering the human has connections to like how can we exist in ecological settings. And I think it also offers this way of practicing positions, like positions of receptivity within these other like political and social structures. Like, I think part of what I'm interested in this kind of work is thinking about forms of resistance to things like capitalism and white supremacy, which is like structure so much of our experience with nature. And then like, at least for me, and I don't know if this probably applies to people in different ways, but for me, I think the thing that I need to practice is like not providing solutions or like not coming to answers, but like to listen and to practice, those types of receptivity to the plants themselves, to other people. And so, I think that like sort of fundamentally drives and motivates the work. And so these things that we can practice here, I'm hopeful that I can then also practice them in these like larger social and political structures.
I just can say maybe examples. So in our virtual reality work, when you put on a headset and you look around and you search for your body and there is none. So maybe this is something, and then we are tasked slightly like very navigating the viewer through the also like down from the to look to this ecosystem from above, and then we are taking she through the tree trunk very far above up. Yeah, so kind of if I want, I can imagine I am a tree, or where is my body? Is it human centric? Maybe not. Yeah, but at least so we wanted really to. We were fascinated ourselves about just changing these perspectives, because it's not like 1 meter, like 70, always this view, for example. Yeah, so it can be from bottom up, can be from completely very far above, looking back to the earth.
Thank you, guys. Yeah. Another question I have is, the works in the show are nestled between different disciplines, different perspectives, and different worldviews. This sort of intersectional approach is helpful when thinking through complexity like climate change or human, non-human interactions or our impacts on the planet. And so I was hoping each of you might speak a little bit about the different disciplines and the worldviews that are informing your work, and how these intersections help you make meaning and tell these stories.
I think I can go ahead and start by saying, just this past month I've been reading a book about sort of naturalism in the mid-19th century, about 1850s and so forth. And this was right at the point in which disciplines were forming. Prior to that, you had people that were going out and discovering new species, these botanists that were exploring. And in their notebooks, you would see on one side their scientific calculations of the latest technology and capability that their tools provided at that time. Of course, we've advanced quite a bit. And on the other side, literally the opposite side of the page, you would have prose about how beautiful the site was, where they made those measurements. And this was just so moving to me. I'm thinking specifically about Alexander von Humboldt and his explorations of South America. But this idea that, science and art are coming from the same place of curiosity is gaining steam in conversations in academia and in culture at this moment. But, it's only for a brief period of time in which these were actually really held as separate to begin with. So I think it's really wonderful that we're at a time when interdisciplinarity is returning to the table and being celebrated more and more. My own academic training is specifically in the arts, but I do feel lucky that through the power of collaboration, but the best place to store knowledge is in someone else, you know, that you can always reach out and work with someone who has that same curiosity, but that different disciplinary knowledge, and that together you might be able to make something that's bigger than what you would be able to with your own skill set and knowledge yourself. So that underpins not just dawning, but really all the works in my practice.
Yeah, let's see. I think I love that you brought up interdisciplinarity too. I guess I can say like my own training is in a like extremely interdisciplinary program. I went to a school that was started in the 70s to like try to sort of destroy disciplines or like not work from a disciplinary way. And so through that, I learned a lot about accessing primary resources and sort of moving across disciplines and finding connections between them. And I found that to be a really sort of valuable and opening way of approaching learning. And I also am like very deeply inspired by the idea of the artist as public amateur, which one of my advisors in grad school, Claire Pentecost, put forward, which is like that one way to think about the role of the artist is to be learning in public. And so I often will sort of reach out across many disciplines. I'm not a scientist, but I love reading scientific papers. I love being able to find the name of a chemical and then go to a perfumery shop and like locate that chemical and learn how it's used in that realm. And so I'm often sort of moving across a lot of different realms. In terms of worldviews, like I think, yeah, I mean, I was trained in a sort of Western science, settler colonial worldview, which gives a, really specific relationship to land and land use that, like, I feel like I'm always sort of trying to unlearn, and particularly like a type of environmentalism that's like often based in racism that I also am trying to sort of unlearn and undo, but that's like an ongoing, very long ongoing process. But one that is also filled with a lot of joy and pleasure. And so that also motivates me as well, like these like places of finding joy and pleasure in this work of learning and unlearning. I guess I was also trained in art and technology studies, so that's like a way that I'm approaching work and being informed by that. So I think, so I'm thinking sort of broadly of like what is media, what constitutes communication, what can we bring in, like what happens when we sort of bring other things into this conversation, like scent as a form of media, as a form of communication, the role of the receptor or like the receptive position within new media communications. So those are like maybe a rambling answer to that question.
I think what we have also realized that working together with scientists actually in a very today's reality, how it would be possible, it probably is not possible really in terms of creating collaborative result, but maybe it's not necessary. So I would rather imagine this collaboration through pluridisciplinary projects, so that there are many disciplines who are working on one topic, they try to find as many connecting points as possible, but the outcomes is art or science paper or I don't know, engineering project, or maybe green digital economy project, or something with sustainable whatever finances or renewable energy. So I think, but there definitely should be somehow some mechanisms which connects, because with this all, each of the field is so sophisticated with their own outcomes expected and methodologies. But if there would be some connecting points and one kind of vision where to go, would be quite interesting to see this type of collaboration.
I just briefly can add, so from our experience, we have had, I would say, luck to work with scientists. We've been working with different scientists for last 20 years. So starting from radio astronomers, biologists, climate scientists, physicists. And we have had this luck that all those scientists we met in person are these sort of curious type of scientists who are as curious as we are about discovering, finding out what we don't know yet. And from there we always get these like inspirations, and then we go our own path in a way. So this is one thing, and the other thing which probably comes from maybe deeper Latvian culture, I would say that sound for us is very important. It's always been a very important part of our work, and the sound as such. So first of all, just going and listening about the environment. So we've been working quite a lot with field recordings also. So that's definitely another part of our interests.
Yeah, there's I feel like that's even how this exhibition sort of came about for me. It's sort of taking all these different perspectives and bumping them up against each other in order to see how new ideas can form. I find it really fascinating to see the diversity within the pieces, yet they're all poking at very similar ideas and trying to understand them. And I think that's one of the key, most important things, is to have that movement of ideas to help create new information, create new ways of thinking about things. I don't know, like I have one more question, but I wanted to warn everyone I'm gonna be like throwing microphones out into the audience soon, so just if anybody's interested, please keep in mind, please put your hand up. I have one last question, and basically speaking from a Western capitalistic framework, which is where we find ourselves, within this context today, it's evident to me that we need to rethink and reshape our relationship to the natural world. So how do you think that artworks, such as the artworks in this exhibition, contribute to a remapping and a rethinking of this relationship? It's kind of a hard question, but something I believe that art can do this, and I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on it. Thank you.
It's broad, yeah, that's very broad, but I think, and it's also very individual, but I've said already before, but I think that these kind of exhibitions are very important, and they contribute not just to the art world itself, which on its own is the world on its own with many different diversities, contradictions, but also they contribute very much to the larger society. However, like if we talk about changing the worldview about the nature and about our environment in general, about ourselves. So it's very important to address this question to as many people as possible, where the exhibitions probably address it to just a certain circle of people, but from there actually those people can take it further. Like if we talk about mass media, so then they can address many more people, but the message usually is more direct, more simplistic, where these kind of exhibitions offer a much more sophisticated view on these topics, on these issues. And they are not just kind of solutions, as you said, but rather the suggestions. So, and bringing up the questions, asking the questions. And by means of technology, maybe I would say that it also, because today we have this moderated world with technology quite dominating, so we can't escape it. I believe it, we have to use it, the technology, because that language kind of speaks to us and speaks to the society, so, and we can address it. I'm not very kind of idealistic about this, but we still kind of have to contribute it, and yeah, just we have to use the means of our days, and we try to bring the message by using the means of our time.
I I think also aesthetic experience, which is like very also powerful here in this exhibition, can make some strong impact because people, because for example, just in this exhibition, so they are showing the like invisible data visualized. So we just see all these dynamics, movements, what's happening here around, which we don't see, or like zooming in or making like slow motion on time lapse. So just zooming in into some specific processes in nature, or like in our work, we are changing perspective. So how we see the same. Like everyday forest, for example, and or using microscope, so really to going into in this invisible world. I think this is what art can do, and I think in our age, when it's quite image-based culture through all the social media, I think probably these images are talking to people even maybe more than probably when new media art avant-garde times. When there was very limited means like how to make aesthetics, so it was more conceptual. But these days, I think just experiencing this one exhibition, it can make definitely a powerful experience of the story through the story.
Just one more thing I want to add is to works like in this exhibition. It requires also some time and some engagement from the spectators. So they have to spend time with each of the works, so to kind of, to understand, to get the feeling. So that's the, requirement in a way.
I think that's a really key thing. And I think we're living in a point and click sort of, I want happiness now, I want things happening in this moment. And a lot of the works are asking for people to slow their body, to become plant, to become tree, to explore, to think through, to take time to look through the microscope, to explore different worlds. Even using some of the technology, you've got to take time to think about it. So it's really asking the body to slow down. So I think, I agree, I think there's a really important part that we're asking people to do something differently with the bodies.
Yeah, if I could just add something, that I think a lot of things can help us to imagine alternate futures, but at the root of that is a sense of creativity and playfulness. Without that sense, you don't access that place where you ask yourself how little things in your daily life or major things in your longer life could be different, how systems could change. So anything that can help you access that sense of playfulness and curiosity can help along that path, especially things that are targeted around climate change, that are targeted around ecosystemic relationships. So I do think the works in this exhibit can help you on that path. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot more to add to that other than like one of the things that I really appreciate about the exhibition and spending time here, like installing and like in the past couple of days, is that there are these threads that are sort of moved throughout, but I have a different experience with them through each piece. Like I can think about the microscopic worlds by being inside of like a representation of that and like moving through it, or seeing it on a pedestal and reading language and sort of thinking through, or I can smell the VOCs and then like walk through the visualization of them. And so there's all of these different modes for different types of experience. There's like storytelling and there's like affective, like immersion. And so for me anyways, the experience is that like there's different ways that that I'm able to sort of access and imagine and process that, which I think is maybe planting seeds for future experiences. I'm hopeful. I imagine that it's planting seeds for sort of future thoughts or future conversations.
It's also really important for the programming for exhibitions like this, that they happen throughout different parts of the city in different places, that we're able to expand on the ideas through different modalities. And so I think that's also a really important part of these types of exhibitions, to help shift perspectives. Thank you guys for your responses. They're always so well thought out. Can I offer the microphone to any talkative people? Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask the artists? I'm happy to bring the microphone. Oh, I got one over here. I'll come to you.
Thank you. I feel okay. Simple and fast. I just want to ask if you see your art as a form of activism and if that contributes to a kind of environmental awakening. All right, that's it.
I'm happy to start on this one. I do not consider my work a form of activism. I think that like political activism and artwork do really different and related things. And I think the artwork can certainly support activism. Like I think it can give us some ways of like approaching our political lives. Or like, yeah, like I think a lot about like the idea of practice, like how an artwork is a practice and experiencing an artwork can be a way of practicing something. But that's not necessarily doing the political work yet. Like you need to sort of take that practice and then bring it to those conversations outside of the gallery space. So I think they can be certainly related, but I think that like, yeah, it's not necessarily like doing the political activism. I think it's potentially supporting somebody to be able to do that myself, maybe, at the very least. But yeah, I would make a distinction there that they're doing related but different things.
Yeah. In our case, maybe putting it in terms of McLuhan's, activism is very hot medium, extremely hot, so where our work we consider rather very cool, so which means you need the time to be engaged with this, and also you have quite a free space to fill it up with your own imagination, with your own thoughts. So yeah, it's rather opposite. Yeah.
And I think I have a lot of questions around the notion of activism at this particular point in my sort of research creation process. Like, what constitutes activism? And what is a political act? Where does agency intersect with the limit of the individual, and where does the collective agency begin? You know, these relational engagements with one another could perhaps be very activist. Every action between individuals in a system could be political. So I don't know. I don't think that my work in this exhibit would be considered an artwork of activism, but I can't say that actions that we all engage with may not be political in ways that we don't realize, and that there might be more ways to be active and activist than simply in the ways that we tend to see in media with a megaphone and with petitions and sort of those more concretized methods. So I'm not sure I really can give a clear answer to that, but I really, really love your question, so thank you for that.
I'm going to ask a question. I think often and wonder if you guys could talk a little bit about awe. You know, I think about like philosophizing or talking philosophically about awe, and I think about that a lot. Like I feel like I get moments of awe quite easily in nature, and I get sometimes moments of awe in art, and I feel like it's, you know, difficult to talk about it directly, but I also still think it's good to talk about, and so I'm wondering how you guys, if you can talk about it a little.
I think for me, the feeling of awe comes from a sense of the sublime. And sublime is when you yourself are faced with something that's so much bigger than yourself, right? So maybe that's why when we're standing at the edge of a canyon or up at an enormous mountainscape that we feel this sense of awe, because we realize how small we are in relation to the totality. But this also actually happens, I think, for me, when thinking about enormous data sets. There's the sublime of a tremendous amount of data that's being collected about the world and accessible through computational arts at this particular moment in history, and increasingly as we go forward. So as a tech artist, as someone who's working with data, I can really kind of conflate and play with that interrelationship between the two, of this sublime of the environmental data, enormous data sets, and the sublime of the enormity of nature. And so there's something really interesting and poetic and powerful there that could use more exploration. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question to think about awe. Like, I think, yeah, there's the route of the sublime, and I think sometimes I think about like Lev Manovich, media theorist, who talks about data visualization as like the anti-sublime, because you're sort of like taking this thing that has all of these like multifaceted ways of experiencing it, and then making it experienceable, and like bringing it into the like, yeah, outside of the sublime, and something that like reveals something to us and then is like manageable. But I guess I'm also thinking about with awe, like the experience of awe specifically is maybe tied to like a sense of humility as well, like that sense of it's like not necessarily something larger, but something that's like that you're not important within. And so maybe that's like, I'm certainly interested in that in these relationships with plants, where like I'm not the subject of this or the object of this transmission. Sometimes I might even be the media of it if I get a poison ivy rash. So like there's something that's, for me, that brings up a sense of awe in that sort of like letting go of a certain amount of self-importance, which also has it's a good feeling. And it's a profound feeling. So yeah, I think I still need to maybe think about it further. But some former colleagues of mine used to like to show, which I've like taken up this practice of showing the double rainbow video from like, a long time ago now. And then there was like the remix of Donald Judd, like with the audio of like the amazing like double rainbow, like what does it mean? And then you're looking at like some Donald Judd work, and like it's sort of like, so talking about this with students, it's sort of like, well, does work ever make you feel like that? Like can artwork ever make you feel like that? And it's like a really good question. Or is it like just the natural world that can make you feel like that? And so it's something I wonder about, like, does art have the capacity to give us that feeling or not? It's I'm not sure. I'm not sure I've had a such a awestruck experience as Double Rainbow with an art piece yet. I want to, but I don't know if it's happened yet. Oh yeah, I want to learn about that.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's difficult to talk about it in a sense of. But what Rasa mentioned, maybe it helps in a way for some people to have this experience in our piece. So where you have a virtual reality environment, so the sense that you're kind of being moved around this environment without the help of your body. So it can be also used as a critique, has been used as a critique for virtual reality, so that there is kind of this detachment from a body. So, but in our case, actually, that's we used it in a benefit, so that you can't really look at the forest from above or from beneath, so unless you can physically. So, but in that sense, and yesterday I had very interesting conversation with one lady, so who said she's been flying very often in her dreams, and that reminded her of that experience in a way. But I'm not sure if that kind of relates to really this awe emotion. So, but yeah, that's my comment.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Yeah. It's interesting because one of the things I've said with when curating the show and making my own artworks is that I'm not trying to replace real experiences in nature. I'm interested in something else. Like I'm interested in this other thing, this other opportunity that the technology affords. I don't know if any of you have any thoughts about what your goals are when you're using virtual reality or live data. If there are any specific goals that you have, what are you trying for the audience to experience?
I think in our case we go this kind of very traditional way how artists work, so that we, of course, we have some vision and some idea, but then very often we start right away experimenting with the medium, and then most of the time also that kind of combination of thinking about the work and working in practice kind of suggests the further steps, so suggests the result, or not the result even, but yeah, the further how it goes. So at one point, of course, you stop and start rationally kind of implementing the methodology and to complete the work. But this beginning phase is it's very much together. So thinking about and trying and experimenting with the, and as I mentioned, so we've been working quite a lot with processes which are in that or another way invisible or inaudible for our senses. So we are trying to bring those in the foreground and see. It's also a challenge for us. It's interesting for ourselves. So it's how to show them and how to present them and how to engage audience and see what's the I don't know. You want to add?
You also have performance and workshop as a part of your practice, is that correct?
Yes, yeah, quite a few times. Like with this one, there's Rasa usually doing a performance also for some events with the resin experiments. But the previous work, which actually was showed 3 years ago in Kitchener here, the fluctuations of microworlds, and the center of that piece is the bacteria batteries. So bacteria which lives in the soil, they generate small amount of electricity, and we sonified and visualized that fluctuations of that electricity. And the technology itself, it's also very sort of engaging and simple. So we are doing also workshops for kids, families, like any audience, how to build your own bacteria cell, and starting from going and getting the materials, going in a field and digging the ground and bringing the soil and with the bacteria, and then starting to build them. So that process is interesting on itself. So it creates this kind of, again, gives this larger context to the work.
I think what's most interesting about the artistic process is how many different stages there are. Like you start with an idea, and then you try to figure out what material would carry that idea forward to the viewer the best. And then you iterate through that, and you experience people who experience the artwork while it's still in its infancy stages. And then finally you get to here, right, where we're at the gallery, we're at the exhibit, and a very large group of people have the opportunity to see it in a very large different number of ways. And so at that point, it stops being just your goal for the artwork, and you just relinquish that to the meeting point of the goal the visitor or the viewer has for how they wish to experience it. And then you learn from that. And I think maybe that key last part of the artistic process is what then drives us to be excited to make the next piece, because we realize we learned so much. We're humbled to know what we didn't know, right, when we went into the beginning of the artwork. So, yeah, I think kind of goals and also like listening and observing play together, and that's the joy of an exhibition. And I don't know, I'm kind of trailing off the end, but it's nice. It's a good feeling.
Yeah, I can relate to this experience of like being at the opening and then learning so much from like sharing the work. And I guess I can say that like for me in this particular piece, I use like pretty fundamental technologies of like high frame rate cameras and geophones and transducers. There's not a whole lot of like data being brought into this particular piece. But like for me, the technology functions in a few ways. Like it can amplify things, but it can also be this sort of like ritual. Like when I bring my geophone out to the forest, like it reminds me to set it up and listen. And so it's almost like this like excuse, and like oftentimes I'll like put the geophone down and then I'll take the headphones off and I'll listen just to the place around me. So there's like that way that like, at least for me in the process of making, the technology helps me like connect with the places that I am. Bringing it into the human audience is always like an extra step. Like I'm often thinking about the plant audience first with a lot of pieces, and then I have to sort of rejig and reconfigure the like human stem, which sounds silly to say out loud, but is true. Yeah.
Thank you guys all for your answers. I think at this point, if I don't see any more hands, does anybody have any questions, any more questions they'd like to ask? Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for their thoughts, their artworks, the conversation, and your thoughtful remarks. So thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm just going to improv jump in to say thank you, Jane, for leading this, and encourage everyone to pick up one of the free publications. And on the second last page is a list of all of the upcoming free events. And as Jane said, they're really varied and wide. And there are other events that aren't part of this book that are part of Jane's research that we will disseminate on social media and in different ways. So check out our websites and our social media.